Neighbors jeered, and local bankers scoffed when Nora dumped truckloads of rotting fish waste across her parched, cracked fields. They branded her an amateur, a failure, and a fool. But as the stagnant air cleared, a shocking transformation took hold. The dead earth surged with life, turning the valley emerald green. The soil of Oakhaven Farms didn't just look dead, it sounded dead. When 32-year-old Nora Caldwell walked across the sprawling 500-acre property, the earth crunched beneath her boots like shattered glass. She knelt, digging her bare fingers into the ground, hoping to find a hint of moisture, a single earthworm, or any sign of life. Instead, the pale brown dirt slipped through her fingers like dry sand, carried away by a hot, mocking July wind. It had been 3 years since her father, Henry Caldwell, had passed away from a sudden heart attack, leaving Nora with a mountain of debt and a farm that was rapidly turning into a dust bowl. For decades, Henry had followed the aggressive, chemical-heavy farming advice pushed by the regional agricultural titans. It had produced bumper crops for a while, but it had systematically stripped the topsoil of its natural microbiology. Now the land was addicted to synthetic fertilizers, and the moment Nora couldn't afford to buy them, the earth simply gave up. The financial reality hit her hardest on a stifling Tuesday morning inside the air-conditioned, sterile office of Gregory Fisk, the senior loan officer at Oakhaven First National. "I'm looking at the ledgers, Nora, and the math just isn't there," Fisk said, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses. He didn't look at her. His eyes were glued to the red ink on his computer screen. "You missed the spring payment. Your yields from last autumn were down 40%. The bank has been lenient because of your father's legacy, but legacy doesn't pay the investors. I just need one more season, Gregory." Nora pleaded, her voice tight but unwavering. "I'm restructuring. I'm rotating the crops." "You're planting on dead dirt." A deep, booming voice interrupted from the doorway. Nora didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Thomas Henderson. Thomas was the CEO of Horizon Ag Corp., a massive corporate farming conglomerate that had been swallowing up family farms across the valley for pennies on the dollar. He was a man who wore tailored suits to the fields and viewed topsoil merely as a sponge for his patented chemical cocktails. "Henderson," Nora said, coldly standing up. "This is a private meeting. It's a foreclosure waiting to happen, Nora." Thomas chuckled, stepping into the room with an arrogant swagger. "Look, I respected Henry, but he left you a sinking ship. I'm prepared to offer you a buyout. It's 20% below market value, given the severe degradation of the land, but it will clear your debt with Mr. Fisker here. You walk away clean. No bankruptcy next to your name." Nora's hands balled into fists at her sides. Horizon Ag Corp was the very company that had sold her father the harsh chemicals that murdered their soil. "I am not selling Oakhaven to the man who poisoned it," she snapped. "Suit yourself," Thomas said, his smile fading into a cold sneer. "But when the bank auctions it off this winter, I'll buy it for half of what I'm offering you today." Fisk cleared his throat. "He has a point, Nora. You have until November 1st. If the harvest doesn't clear your outstanding balance of $180,000, the bank will seize the property." Nora walked out of the bank into the blinding afternoon sun, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. She had no money for the industrial fertilizers required to force a crop out of the dead soil. She had no collateral left to borrow against. That evening, seeking solace in a cheap cup of coffee, Nora sat in a secluded booth at the local diner. The diner was mostly empty, save for a few weary truckers and 2 men sitting a few booths down, loudly complaining over plates of greasy meatloaf. "I'm telling you it's highway robbery," one of the men groaned. Nora recognized him vaguely. Liam Gallagher, a manager at a coastal fish processing plant 40 miles away. "The environmental fees for disposing of the waste are skyrocketing. We're paying thousands every month just to haul off fish heads, guts and bones to the specialty landfill. It's ruining our margins." Nora stopped mid-sip, her mind desperate and racing, latched onto the words, fish heads, guts, bones. She rushed home and dug through the dusty boxes of agricultural textbooks in her father's attic. She bypassed the modern literature on synthetic nitrates and pulled out dog-eared, decades-old journals diving deep into indigenous farming practices and ancient soil science. She read about the Native American practice of burying a fish alongside corn seeds. She researched the chemical breakdown of marine biology, how fish waste is a powerhouse of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, trace minerals, and, most importantly, amino acids that could feed the dormant microbial life in the soil. But throwing raw fish on 500 acres would just summon every scavenger in the state. She needed to break it down. She needed to create a fish hydrolysate, a liquid emulsion created through anaerobic fermentation. It was insane. It was messy. It was entirely unproven on a commercial scale in Oakhaven Valley, but it was practically free. The next morning, Nora drove her battered pickup truck 40 miles to Gallagher's Catch on the coast. Liam Gallagher looked at her as if she had grown a second head. "You want my garbage? All of it." "I want every ounce of fish waste you generate." "Liam," Nora said, standing on the wet, pungent loading dock. "Guts, bones, scales, everything. But I can't pay you for it. What I can do is take it off your hands for free. You save thousands a month on disposal fees, and I get the fertilizer I need." Liam stared at her, then broke into a loud, booming laugh. "Lady, if you want to haul 3 tons of rotting fish guts back to Oakhaven every week, be my guest. But don't come crying to me when your neighbors run you out of town with pitchforks." The logistics were a nightmare. Nora scraped together the last few $1,000s from her emergency savings to buy 10 massive 275-gallon IBC totes and rented a rusted second-hand vacuum truck. When she brought the first load back to Oakhaven Farms, the smell was apocalyptic. It was the thick, gag-inducing odor of marine decay, magnified by the July heat. As she pumped the raw gelatinous fish waste into the plastic totes lined up behind her main barn, the air grew thick with flies. To break the waste down into usable fertilizer, without it simply putrefying into a biohazard, she had to ferment it. Nora became a mad scientist. She added unsulfured molasses to feed the bacteria, and inoculated the vats with lactobacillus, a beneficial bacteria she cultured herself from milk to speed up the breakdown of the proteins and neutralize the worst of the pathogens. But the smell couldn't be contained. The prevailing winds carried the odor straight into the town of Oakhaven. Within 3 days, the complaints began. The local hardware store owner, Arthur Penny, covered his nose with a handkerchief when Nora came in to buy PVC piping. "Lord Almighty, Nora, have you lost your mind out there? My wife can't even hang the laundry out to dry. The whole town smells like a rotting pier." The local paper, the Oakhaven Tribune, ran a satirical front-page cartoon depicting Nora as a swamp witch stirring a cauldron of dead fish with the headline, "Caldwell's Catch of the Day Farm goes from dust to disgust." Through it all, Thomas Henderson was watching. He drove his pristine black SUV past her property lines, rolling his window down just enough to snap photos of the massive tanks before speeding away. He wasn't just laughing. He was plotting. Thomas knew that if Nora actually managed to grow a crop and save her farm, his plan to buy Oakhaven at a fire sale price would vanish. He needed to shut her down immediately. On a humid Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks after Nora had started the fermentation process, a crisp, white county vehicle pulled up to her farmhouse. Out stepped Inspector Jenkins from the County Health and Environmental Safety Department, flanked by 2 deputies. Nora's heart dropped into her stomach. She wiped her grease-stained hands on her jeans and walked out to meet them. "Miss Caldwell." Inspector Jenkins said, his face pinched in disgust as the wind shifted. "We've received over 50 complaints regarding biological hazards and improper waste disposal on this property. Furthermore, a formal complaint has been filed suggesting you are creating an unlicensed hazardous biochemical dump." Nora knew exactly who filed that formal complaint. "Inspector, it's not a waste dump. It's an agricultural input. I'm fermenting fish hydrolysate to use as an organic soil amendment." Jenkins pulled out a clipboard. "Miss Caldwell storing raw animal waste in these quantities without a commercial waste processing permit is a Class A violation. I have the authority to shut down this farm today, mandate a hazmat cleanup at your expense, and fine you up to $50,000. The words hit her like a physical blow. $50,000. She didn't even have $50. "Please let me show you," Nora urged, fighting the panic rising in her throat. She led the reluctant inspector to the back of the barn where the massive totes sat. "It's not raw waste anymore. It's undergoing anaerobic digestion." She opened the valve on one of the vats and caught a sample in a glass jar. The liquid was no longer chunky or rotting. It was a dark, rich brown, and the horrific smell of dead fish had surprisingly mellowed into a sharp, earthy, vinegary tang. "Look at the data," Nora said, shoving a meticulously kept logbook into Jenkins' hands. "I've been tracking the pH levels every 12 hours. The lactobacillus drops the pH to 3.5. At that acidity, human pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella cannot survive. The bones and proteins are completely dissolved into amino acids. Under the state's Right to Farm Act, the creation of on-site compost and organic emulsions for personal agricultural use is protected, provided it doesn't pose a pathogenic threat." Jenkins frowned, looking from the heavily researched logbook to the brown liquid in the jar. He was a bureaucrat expecting a crazy woman hoarding garbage, but instead he found a desperate farmer with a chemically sound, albeit highly unusual, operation. "I'm taking this sample back to the lab," Jenkins said stiffly. "If I find a single dangerous pathogen, I'm returning with a cease and desist order. And Miss Caldwell, you better pray this works, because the town council is drafting a nuisance ordinance as we speak." For 3 agonizing days, Nora waited for the lab results. She couldn't sleep. She sat on her porch, staring out at the cracked, barren dirt under the moonlight, wondering if she had just sealed her own doom. When the call finally came, Jenkins's voice was tight with irritation. "The pH levels confirmed your logs. Pathogen count is negligible. You're operating within the legal loopholes of the agricultural code. But I'm warning you, Caldwell. One spill into the local water table, and I'll personally lock the gates." Nora dropped the phone and let out a sob of relief. But the victory was only a technicality. Now came the real test. She hitched her tractor to a massive sprayer, diluting the rich brown fish emulsion with water. As she drove the tractor over the dead, dusty fields, the nozzles misted the concoction over the soil. The smell returned, blanketing the farm in a pungent aroma of vinegar and sea. She sprayed for 3 days straight, exhausting herself, working until her hands bled and her vision blurred. She drenched the 500 acres in the liquid life she had painstakingly brewed. Then she planted her winter wheat, and she waited. The town continued to mock her. Thomas Henderson laughed loudly at the country club, boasting to Gregory Fisk that he already had his architects drawing up plans for the subdivision he was going to build over the stinking Caldwell grave. A week passed. No rain came. The ground remained a harsh, pale brown. 2 weeks passed. Nora walked the fields, digging into the dirt. It felt slightly softer, but there was no green. The crushing weight of the November 1st bank deadline loomed just 2 months away. As she sat in the dirt one evening, the sky above Oakhaven Valley finally began to darken. A low rumble of thunder echoed off the hills, and then the rain began to fall. It wasn't a destructive downpour, but a slow, steady, soaking rain that lasted for 2 days, driving the rich fish-based amino acids deep into the root zone of the thirsty earth. What happened next would silence Oakhaven Valley forever. The morning after the 2-day soak, Nora walked out onto her front porch with a steaming mug of coffee. She braced herself for the familiar, soul-crushing sight of cracked, barren earth. But as her eyes adjusted to the dawn light, she dropped her mug. It shattered on the wooden floorboards, but Nora didn't notice. The earth wasn't pale brown anymore. It was a rich, deep chocolate cake black. The fish hydrolysate, carried deep into the soil profile by the rain, had acted like a defibrillator to a dying heart. The dormant, starving microbes in the dirt had exploded into action, feeding frantically on the pure amino acids, nitrogen, and trace minerals from the marine waste. In a matter of weeks, the winter wheat broke through the surface, not in weak yellowing patches, but in thick, vibrant emerald-green rows. It was a color Oakhaven Valley hadn't seen on the Caldwell farm in over a decade. Word spread faster than a prairie fire. The same neighbors who had covered their noses and snickered a month earlier were now pulling their pickup trucks onto the shoulder of the highway, staring over Nora's fence line in absolute disbelief. Arthur Penny, the hardware store owner, flagged her down at the mailbox one afternoon. He took off his cap, scratching his bald head. "Nora, I owe you an apology. I've never seen wheat come up that thick, especially not off a late planting. Your root structures must be digging halfway to China." "It's the biology, Arthur." Nora smiled, a genuine spark in her eyes, for the first time in years. The fish emulsion didn't just feed the plant, it fed the soil. The worms are back. To prove her point, she reached down, dug a trowel into the dirt, and pulled up a clump. The earth held together, perfectly held by the sticky exudates of thriving bacteria, and right in the center, 3 large earthworms wriggled happily. But as the farm resurrected, a shadow fell over Oakhaven. Thomas Henderson sat in his sprawling, glass-walled office at Horizon Ag Corp, staring at a drone photograph of Nora's property. His own chemically treated fields adjacent to hers were struggling through a dry spell, the synthetic fertilizers sitting uselessly on the surface without irrigation. Yet Nora's fields were a lush, dark green oasis. Henderson slammed his fist on his mahogany desk. If Nora Caldwell brought that crop to market, she would clear her debt. If she cleared her debt, the bank wouldn't auction the land. And if she proved that a farmer could get record-breaking yields using free garbage instead of Horizon Ag Corp's expensive chemical packages, it would threaten his entire regional empire. He picked up the phone and dialed the local bank. The twist came on a crisp, early October morning. Nora was in the barn repairing a belt on her old combine harvester when a black town car crunched up her driveway. It wasn't Inspector Jenkins. It was a corporate courier. He handed her a thick manila envelope, asked for her signature, and drove away without a word. Nora ripped open the envelope. The legal jargon was dense, but the core message was a devastating blow. Notice of debt assignment and acceleration. Horizon Ag Corp had used a predatory corporate loophole. Seeing that Oakhaven First National was looking to reduce its high-risk agricultural portfolio, Thomas Henderson had simply bought Nora's $180,000 debt directly from the bank. Henderson was no longer just a rival farmer. He was her sole creditor. And buried in the fine print of her father's original loan agreement was a material adverse change clause. Henderson had invoked it, citing the unorthodox and hazardous waste practices on the property as a risk to the collateral's value. He was legally accelerating the loan. She didn't have until November 1st, after the harvest, anymore. The full balance was due in exactly 14 days. If she defaulted, He wouldn't just auction the farm, he would seize it outright. Panic seized Nora's chest. The wheat was magnificent, but it wasn't ready. It was still 2 weeks away from being dry enough to harvest. Even if she cut it early, the moisture content would be too high and the grain elevators would reject it. She drove frantically to the bank, but Gregory Fisk wouldn't even see her. She drove to Henderson's office, but security escorted her off the premises. That night, Nora sat at her kitchen table surrounded by ledgers and soil reports, sobbing into her hands. She had done the impossible. She had resurrected dead dirt. She had grown a miracle crop, and it was all going to be stolen from her right at the finish line by a stroke of a corporate pen. The phone rang. It was Liam Gallagher, the fish processing manager. "Nora, are you okay? The boys down at the docks heard some rumors about Horizon Ag Corp pulling a fast one on you. It's over, Liam." Nora choked out the exhaustion, finally breaking her spirit. "He bought my debt. He's calling the loan in 14 days. The wheat won't be ready. I have no cash. He wins." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Nora, listen to me," Liam said, his voice deadly serious. "You didn't just solve a farming problem. You solved a massive industrial problem for the coastal fisheries. You proved this works. You just need collateral to get a bridge loan from a different bank, right? Something to prove the crop's worth before it's cut." "No bank in the valley will cross Henderson," Nora said. "Then we don't look in the valley," Liam replied. "I know a guy in the city, a massive artisanal flour miller. He pays top dollar for regenerative high-protein organic grain. Get your soil tested. Get the wheat tissue tested. Bring me the data." The next 48 hours were a blur of manic energy. Nora called an independent agricultural lab, 3 counties overpaying exorbitant rush fees with her last remaining credit card. They sent an agronomist, Dr. Eris Thorne, wait just Dr. Eris, to pull deep-core soil samples and clip the heads of the ripening winter wheat. 3 days later, the digital report landed in Nora's inbox. The numbers defied modern conventional logic. Soil organic matter increased from 0.8% to 3.2% in a single season. Water retention up by 400%. Nitrogen levels saturated completely stable. Wheat protein content. Projected at an unprecedented 15.5% standard commodity, wheat hovered around 11%. Armed with the data, Nora drove to the city with Liam Gallagher. They walked into the sleek, modern headquarters of Heritage Grains Bakery and Mill. The owner, David Campbell, was a purist who sourced grain for high-end bakeries across the West Coast. David adjusted his glasses, staring at the lab results, then looking up at Nora. "You achieved this protein density without a single ounce of synthetic nitrogen. Just fish, hydrolysate molasses, and indigenous biology," Nora said firmly. "The soil is alive, Mr. Campbell. The roots are tapping into deep mineral reserves that chemicals can't reach. But I need a forward contract. I need you to buy the crop right now before it's harvested at a premium price. Otherwise, a corporate conglomerate is going to bulldoze it to build a subdivision." David tapped his pen against the desk. "If this protein content holds, this isn't just wheat. This is artisan gold. It yields better bread, better pasta, better everything." He slid a contract across the desk. It wasn't just enough to cover the $180,000 debt. At a 300% premium over the commodity market price, the forward contract was worth $450,000. "I'll wire the funds to an escrow account this afternoon," David said, shaking her hand. "Don't let them take that land, Nora." Day 14 arrived with a biting autumn chill. Thomas Henderson pulled his black SUV directly up to Nora's farmhouse. He didn't come alone. He brought his corporate lawyer and the county sheriff to serve the eviction notice and take immediate possession of Oak Haven Farms. Henderson stepped out of the car, A smug, triumphant smile plastered across his face. He looked out at the rolling fields of golden swaying wheat, his wheat now. "It's a shame, Nora," Henderson called out as Nora stepped onto the porch. "You really did a remarkable job out there. I'll be sure to use the profits from this harvest to fund the demolition of this old house." The sheriff looked deeply uncomfortable. "Miss Caldwell, I'm sorry, but unless you have a cashier's check for $180,412, I have to ask you to vacate the premises." Nora didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She reached into the front pocket of her denim jacket and pulled out a crisp, certified cashier's check from the National Bank of Commerce. She walked down the porch steps and pressed it flat against Henderson's chest. $181,000 to cover the interest, Nora said, her voice echoing with the strength of a woman who had literally brought the dead back to life. "Oakhaven First National has already been notified, and the lien release is being filed with the county clerk as we speak." Henderson looked at the check, the color draining completely from his face. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His lawyer leaned in, squinting at the bank seal, and nodded grimly. It was valid. How? Henderson finally sputtered, his arrogant facade crumbling into pure shock. "No local elevator would front you that cash. The crop isn't even cut." "I didn't sell it to a local elevator, Thomas." Nora smirked. "I sold it to the premium organic market. Something you can't do because your soil is nothing but dead dirt addicted to chemicals." She turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff, this man is now trespassing on my private property. I'd like him removed." The sheriff, hiding a massive grin beneath his mustache, tipped his hat to Nora. "You heard the lady, Mr. Henderson." Back in the car, humiliated, defeated, and red-faced, Henderson climbed back into his SUV and sped off down the dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. 2 weeks later, the real harvest began. The rumble of Nora's old combine echoed through the valley, stripping the golden wheat from the stalks. The yield monitors in the cab beeped frantically, recording bushel weights that shattered county records. Neighbors lined the fence line again, but this time there was no laughing. There were cheers. Arthur Penny and a dozen other traditional farmers showed up at Nora's barn that evening, holding notepads and asking for the fish recipe. The local paper, the Oakhaven Tribune, ran a new headline: "The Miracle of Oakhaven. How trash saved the town's best farm." Nora Caldwell had not only saved her father's legacy, she had ignited a green rebellion, and as she looked out over the freshly harvested fields, inhaling the rich earthy scent of living soil, she knew the land would never go hungry again. Nora Caldwell's journey from a laughing stock to a pioneer of regenerative agriculture proves that sometimes the craziest ideas are exactly what the earth needs. Nature has its own ways of healing if we just listen and provide the right tools. If you were inspired by Nora's fight against corporate greed and her miraculous soil revival, hit that like button. Share this incredible story with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing real-life farming dramas.